How's it going, gamers? Welcome to the dojo. A couple months back, kind of closer to the start of the year, I set out to build the ultimate N64. It was a part of my collection goal to get, the full 64 library, kind of all the fantastic 64s. I also wanted to kind of mod and slowly piece together what I would consider the ultimate Nintendo 64, my favorite console of all time growing up. And with that, we've made some slight progress. We still have ways to go, but I want to kind of share kind of the phase one approach of the mods made. And starting out simple, right off the gate, we're starting with an external shell swap that I did a couple months back, just to kind of bring new life to a standard OG N64. So a lot of cosmetic changes with the external swap, the jewel swap with the logo, and a couple of accessories and a small and one of my first soldering jobs, an LED mod to the 64. So without further ado, enjoy some of the footage gathered over the last couple months. I have a lot more stuff in mind. We have some HDMI stuff that I might be swapping over a board for a custom modded N64 digital HDMI mod. We have some accessories that I've thrown in, like the EverDrive and whatnot, and we have a long ways to go.
Alright, so the aim of the game for phase one is purely external. It's going to be shell swapping from the standard OEM N64 shell to this completely translucent and transparent one. And we're going to do the region-free tray mod as well. So purely just external, slight internal mods. Nothing crazy for phase one. Alrighty, let's do this.
Okay, so voiceover Adrian coming in here. If you've never taken apart an N64 before, by no means is this truly a true-to-life tutorial. There's a lot of great stuff for that online, but it's pretty straightforward. You need your game bit screwdriver, but it's one of the easier consoles to take apart, and as you can see here, the motherboard in itself is pretty straightforward. It has a heatsink on it. Everything is pretty much contained, and since the N64 has that external power brick, there's not too much you have to really take apart. It really is just that kind of top shell, bottom shell, and everything is kind of clamped into one. There are a bunch of screws you have to kind of go through, and as you can see here, reassembling the bottom shell is where you'll have to get a lot of those screws back in. There's a couple little metal clips that you have to get into the bottom. I originally didn't put those in, so I had to restart. Take your time, have a guide to reference, iFixit, what have you. And just make sure that you get all the proper screws back into place. If you're doing this on a older N64, like in this case this is a used one, doesn't hurt to make sure that you clean it out, take the opportunity, dust it out, especially if it's these older used ones. You never know what's in there. You might as well take the opportunity to clean these out, and kind of help improve the quality of life in the long run for these consoles. The other thing, which you may or may not notice, in the top right, that AV port, so where your video and audio plug in, there is a little shroud that goes around this little, little acrylic piece, whether it's the OG one or a third-party case like this one. Make sure you put that in before you screwed the board down. What ends up happening here is I have to put everything together because it's much harder to lift and put that piece in. Much easier to situate it first and then screw everything down. So here's me getting that piece in properly. Like I said, much easier. You do that the first time around before you screw everything down. With that situated, you can then repeat the process and put all the screws back. Speaking of which, these cases, you might be asking or wondering, where can you get these? Nowadays, you can get these on anywhere from AliExpress. eBay tends to have these. Sometimes you can get lucky on Amazon, just depending. And they range anywhere. Typically, you should be paying under $100 for these. I'd say I've seen them as cheap as like 50, and as much as like 80 to 90, just kind of depending on where you get it. AliExpress, if you're getting them overseas, it's definitely going to be much cheaper, but again, you're still going to have to pay anywhere from that 50 to 80-ish dollar price point, depending on the color you get and whatnot. So at this point, we're moving to the top shell or top of the case on the N64. And the second mod we're doing here, I guess I would consider it external, but somewhat internal mod, is a pretty easy one to do, and that's the region-free mod. If you don't know, Japanese N64s or Japanese cartridges were not able to play on US NTSC consoles and vice versa, and it was all a region lock that was physical. So nowadays it's very common where like CDs from certain countries can't be played on certain consoles. Back then, it was all physical for the Nintendo 64. Literally, the cartridges were slightly different tabs and sizes, and the cartridge slots, as a result, were slightly different sizes, smaller or bigger, depending on the console you had. So you couldn't play Japanese cards on a US N64. In the modern era, however, you can 3D print these cartridges, or you can buy them online for less than $2. That essentially allow you to have the ability to play both regions on your N64. So it's a very common mod that you can do. It's one of the easiest ones to make your console essentially region free. In this case, I also got a clear acrylic N64 region free slot off of eBay for, again, like less than $3. And then at this point, I'm just reversing the whole process, getting all those screws in, getting the feet installed, getting the expansion slot and everything put back in to wrap up the install. And then alongside the 64, I did pick up some accessories to kind of match on brand. I got this Brawler 64. This is a Ultra Edition, Ultra 64 Edition. Reason being, if you didn't know, the project name for the Nintendo 64 prior to its release was the Ultra 64. So I got this on a Whatnot auction. It's from the brand that is Retro Fighters. Got this at a good price. Unfortunately, it is missing the adapter. However, if you have any Brawler 64 controllers, I believe they all kind of use the same adapter. So I'm going to be picking up one of those. But here we have it. It has this really kind of sleek black, gray theme. I know it doesn't necessarily match the new shell I have on the 64, but what this will allow me is to have a wireless controller for my Nintendo 64, and one that's a little bit more modern compared to the, controversial, some people hated it, some people loved it, 64 ergonomic of the original controller. By the way, don't mind the rotated camera in the top left. I definitely messed up the setup here when I was recording this. But speaking of Ultra 64, one thing I did not get to mention, or I couldn't find the footage of for the life of me, is that Jewel logo installed. So that Ultra 64 Jewel logo to kind of match this Ultimate 64 project. These you can get on eBay as well from like $4, $5, $6. The one I got was from a seller that is overseas, and that tends to be the popular one. So it does take a little bit to ship, but you get a couple of them, you get a discount. I plan on getting more for future projects, but yeah, I installed that on. It applies just like a sticker, so really, really easy to adhese. And then we're going to be installing an LED mod in here. So these LEDs are from Handheld Legends, and this was my first soldering project. And with that, at least it is a easy soldering project to approach. An LED diode is pretty straightforward. You just unsolder the LED, resolder it. However, again, this was my first soldering project, and while I had my soldering iron and some basic tools in, I did not have like a desoldering wick or even flux, which would have made this project so much easier for my first job. So what should have took me ideally, 5, maybe 10 minutes, ended up taking me more like 30 to 40 minutes. Now, that's not including the disassembly of the 64 again. You'll also notice I did throw a proper expansion pack in this to give it that, of course, ultimate feel. That extra, 4 megabytes of RAM. But anyways, yeah, we're going to be uninstalling the traditional LED. I got 2 different LEDs. I got a slow changing color one that alternates through different colors, and a white LED. The original plan was to throw the alternating color one in here, but as you'll see in a moment, I accidentally threw the wrong one in, so got that in and then had to swap out. I'm still debating, however, the look I want, if I want the white or the alternating. They even have like blue, all sorts of different colors. So I'll leave links to those in the video description below. To the LED here. So my lay understanding here of this is that I'm going to want to essentially just kind of flip the LED up so it's facing upwards, which should be fairly simple here because it's just, again, LED there. And that's going to allow it, once we start to heat up that joint, where we're hoping that we can just kind of essentially pull it outwards like so. Okay, so that 100% took way longer than it needed to, because one, I just didn't know what I was doing, and probably because I don't have the proper, you know, flux and all that. Oh yeah. I am just gonna like desolder it a little bit just so I can have the LED stick out a little bit more outward. So like I want it jutting out of the board just a little bit more so it sits nicely. Go ahead and just kind of snip the excess wiring here from the LEDs. Pocket right there. And then honestly, at this point, it's just re-screwing everything in. You want to make sure that you put the I/O shield back, of course. And we'll go ahead and then resituate everything. Perfect. And then honestly, just reverse all the screws. Alright, moment of truth, we're going to do this like so. So, it's powered on. In theory, I can flip this switch and... Look at that. It's white. This is not the color changing one. After all of that. So it literally took me like a minute to swap since I'm such an expert now. Hey, would you look at that? I done did it. Okay, so admittedly, this took me much longer than it should have taken anybody who's you know, somewhat savvy with this stuff. But I will say, like, given it was my first soldering job and experience with these tools, and probably wasn't doing a lot of stuff the right way, I definitely kind of just learned a lot as I went. And like after I finally got the first like default power LED out, it made it so much easier. Like when I ended up putting in the wrong LED, I was able to get that out in like less than 30 seconds and put the new one in. So it was a learning experience, but it was fun. I think that's the whole point of kind of like tinkering with things like this. You know, I don't want to say low risk because there's obviously a risk. There is inherent value in something like this, but it is fun because like this is the 64 that I've tinkered, toyed with, modded to a degree, and now I've done my first soldering job with it. And here we are in the modern day. Here's where the Ultimate 64 is currently and where it stands. We have that translucent case that we installed a couple months back. We have that custom jewel for the Ultra 64 look. Threw in the expansion slot, region, free tray, all of the kind of basic mods. We added some cool accessories to it. I picked up a blue retro. So this is just this tiny controller adapter that you plug into any of the controller ports. And this lets you pair Bluetooth controllers, modern day controllers, to your Nintendo 64. So for convenience and that wireless capability, going alongside the third-party controllers I have, like the Hyperkin or the Brawler 64, I can kind of have multiple players with wireless controllers and setups here, even though it looks kind of crazy on my Nintendo 64. On top of that, we also picked up the EverDrive 64, the X7 model to be exact, so the kind of top of the line flash cart for the Nintendo 64. If you don't know what an EverDrive is, it allows you to essentially load your backups or games on a SD card, a micro SD card, and you throw it in this cart, and you have the ability to play multiple games in all on one cartridge. So in theory, you can have the entire 64 library all on one cart. So there's that accessory added as well. And then, and potentially in the future here, we have my N64 Smoke Gray edition that has already the N64 digital from Pixel Effects. This is prior to the Retro Gem, the model that they had. It has that HDMI port installed right there. As you can see, there's a mini HDMI. So I plan to potentially transplant the motherboard from this one and the mod that's already installed over to this board in this whole case. That way, all of the kind of mods live in one ultimate 64. So we'll have the HDMI output, we'll have the wireless capabilities, we'll have the EverDrive cart. I wish I could have gotten the EverDrive in clear. It's just always been sold out. So what I might have to do is get like a third-party cart and swap this. And yeah, we'll have a pretty modded N64 at that point. Some other things I also want to look into is like a re-PSU adapter, or swap of the power supply, so to get a more modern power supply that allows for like a barrel plug connector and gets rid of the whole, chunky power supply here in the back. And yeah, we'll see where that takes us. But as it stands right now, I can play my N64 much more conveniently, whether it's on my CRT TV, I still have access to the multi-out, or I can hook it up, like I said, with the N64 digital and play via HDMI. I can use that for much easier and better capture. So that's going to be really great for this channel in terms of capturing footage and games. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what's in store for this 64 in the future. But as it stands right now, it's in a pretty crazy state. But I'm pretty proud of all the adjustments, mods, and accessories that we've added thus far. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and subscribe for future editions as we continue to make this the quote-unquote ultimate Nintendo 64. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks for watching, gamers.